top 5 list, right? It's kind of a, we got 5 slides talking about what we believe to be the 5 top reasons dogs are dying, primarily for behavior reasons. And then we're gonna do our best to leave a good amount of time for questions at the end. And we've got some footage we wanna show you guys, and we're gonna probably keep this kind of light and conversational, but you guys ready? Sweet. I guess we should, say who we are. I'm Mike. I was at Austin Pets Alive for over 6 years. I went to APA in 2012 to bring the Dogs Playing for Life playgroup program to Austin Pets Alive. At the time in 2012, Austin had achieved a 90% save rate for all animals. What was left were the big dogs. And so at 90%, the goal was, well, how do we go even further and save the last 10%? And so I learned from Amy Sadler, my training mentor for Dogs Playing for Life, came to join Dr. J in 2012 to build our behavior program in Austin with playgroups at the foundation of what we do. And then Aaron was my very first hire. I left the behavior department 4 years later to run operations at APA. Aaron carried the torch, and I'm very proud to say that when I left, and even before that, Austin had achieved a 99% save rate for dogs. So that's certainly the highest save rate in the country. We do believe a lot of what we're talking about we're kind of at the heart of those increased save rates. And then I left in August of this year to become the director at OC Animal Care and to try to bring what we've done here in Austin to Orange County, and kind of join the amazing work already occurring in Orange. I've got my badass RVT Jamie back there here to learn. And so that's me. And then Aaron's running the show in the behavior department now. He doesn't need me anymore. But that's Aaron.
Still want you around, but so I've been with APA for about 8 years now, so was with APA before Mike actually showed up. I don't know how or why he chose to take me under his wing, but I got very lucky when he came in, brought the Dogs Playing for Life model with him to be able to join him, start learning play groups, and see the change that it brought for our dogs in shelter on a daily basis. So. We were lucky to have him. We miss him dearly now, but we're continuing to kick butt and try to save as many lives as possible here in Austin. So.
Yeah, you are. All right, guys. So I think we can probably all agree when we go through these 5 behaviors that these are likely the behaviors that we're all seeing in our shelters that are causing dogs to either legitimately and literally lose their lives, or at the very least stay in our shelters for an undetermined amount of time and potentially eventually meet their demise. And so these behaviors, we think, and it's been interesting, in Austin, we've been able to kind of study the trends that exist in the last 10% of dogs, and even earlier than that. And from my experience around the country, it's the same. When you're getting to those mid-80, low 90, mid-90, high 90 marks, we feel like it's the same categories of behavior all around the country. And so for me, that's kind of exciting because we can kind of see, well, with those trends, what is working to get up to move that needle? What programs do you need to develop in order to move that needle and get those save rates higher? And so I think it's just interesting to study that. So I think no shock to any of you. We believe that just scared dogs in our shelters are certainly at risk. We know the shelter can be a terrifying place for dogs. And Jamie, I don't know if you've seen this yet, but we just at OC Animal Care had a dog in our care that was all we had was in-shelter behavior. His name was Bradley, and he couldn't be touched. We literally could not touch him. He was highly defensive. I could never actually pet this dog through the month and a half that we were working with him in shelter. Underdog Alliance, one of our partners, pulled him, and I just saw he passed his CGC test when he got out of the shelter.
What?
And so, yeah, you've met Bradley.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that for us is just continued examples of how no matter what, even if you have a full-fledged behavior department, even if you have a beautiful, glistening shelter, still the shelter environment can still just be terrifying for dogs. And so that was an extreme example. But on a more regular basis, we all see dogs who are just hiding in their kennel. They don't want to walk on leash. They aren't really motivated by people or petting or praise. They're too shy or nervous to even like take treats from you. They may be defensive in their fear, and those guys are especially at risk in shelter because aggression is such a misunderstood concept in really shelters nationwide and even in dog training. So we see dogs who they don't believe they even have the opportunity to choose flight. They're in their kennel and they feel trapped. If you cut a hole in the back of the kennel, they'd probably run out of it, but they feel trapped, and so their response is defensive aggression. And we see all around the country that those are absolutely dogs that are being killed all around the country. And even in times of space crises for shelters that have to make these space decisions at times, I know that it's often, all right, those are the first guys to go. We were trying to give them time, but hey, we need 12 empty kennels. We are full, and all right, it's the scared dogs. It's the ones who aren't coming out and are hiding in the back of the kennel that are often the first kind of selected. And so in working with scared dogs, we covered this one technique in the last presentation we did, but we really love this flexi routine. And so this dog is actually an APA dog who they believed would be a good candidate for this routine because of how fearful that she is. She actually just pretty quickly was really happy to be given the choice to be away from the handler. So again, I apologize for any of the redundancy from the last presentation, but one thing that we were amazed by when we learned this from Amy Sadler was, oh wow, there's actually a cool way to use a flexi leash? Like what? We were kind of just cutting those and throwing them away. Whoops. And so the reason that we love the flexi for this and for scared dogs is because it is really empowering for the fearful dog to be given the choice to be away from you if they want to be, and to actually choose on their own to decrease the distance to the handler. When they're just on a normal 4 to 6 foot leash, that's actually aversive to that dog, right? That dog does not want to be that close to you. And so your odds of actually rapidly, increasing that dog's comfort with you are pretty slim. On the flexi lead, we can give them the full length, go out into kind of an open area. If they have any food motivation at all, we can then capitalize on that. And even if the dog is 16 feet away, the second they kind of glance and even just in your direction, we want to mark that and then just kind of toss some food kind of subtly so that they can pick that food up. And that can be some of the first indication this dog has of, maybe actually being near this person is actually a good thing. So that they can choose to decrease that distance on their own. And now in shelter, what's critical, and you're going to hear us use the G word a lot, generalization. You're going to hear us use that a lot. And that's important for all of this, but it's especially important for fearful dogs. And it's especially important because in shelter, I think there's such a common habit of just that one volunteer or that one staff member rallying around that one scared dog. And then that dog loves that person. She waits for John all day long, but John's not there and she doesn't want to walk for anybody else. And so with this exercise, your goal is to get the dog choosing over time to decrease that distance, come hang out next to you now. Now they can get some food by hand. Once they get to that point, we always encourage now switch handlers. Don't have that dog now just latch onto that one person, get another person. And that's emotionally difficult because now you're actually, if you're that first person, you want to back out of that dog's life for a couple weeks, put the next person in, get that person comfortable with the dog, and keep going until you can build a pool of people who now the dog is comfortable with all of you, and now you can move on to more invasive stuff like hand targeting and getting the dog more comfortable with your hands. Now, that's one exercise, two exercises, hand targeting, this flexi routine. The first thing we do, though, with any fearful dog in shelter is that bottom bullet. We really, really believe that if a dog has any pack drive, meaning if they have any desire to be around other dogs, that can be often the only B-mod we actually needed. And this is a 6-minute video, but it's worth it because this really shows the power of playgroup for even fearful dogs. So this is a dog named Swiffer, who is at the Longmont Humane Society, and they're kind of a partner of ours. They also run Dogs Playing for Life programming. And so you all, and it's kind of an older video, so sorry with some of the graininess, but you all have or have had dogs like this in your shelter, right? They're hiding in the back of the kennel. They're almost in this catatonic state. No defense at all, but hiding in the back of the kennel, not approaching. Amy there is throwing food to the dog. Dog has no interest in the food, right? And so in our shelters, turn this.
Just think about that barking too for that fearful dog. It's probably not super helpful.
So in our shelters, some common things that and you see that petting right there. Is that petting, you think, pleasant to that dog, right? And so what it does show that she's not defensive, which is good for us to diagnose whenever we're working with fear cases. Does the dog have defense or not? But in our shelters, common things we do for dogs like this, we read to them, we go in the kennels, we bring them tasty treats, we sit with them. And I'm not critical of that, but I don't think we really have time in our shelters the time it takes to get a dog to come out to us with those measures. Playgroup can really rapidly expedite that. So this is the dog's first day coming to playgroups.
You were just shoplifted. Yeah. Oh, that's pretty nice and handy.
And you could see coming up, the dog was hunkered to the ground, still fairly uncomfortable, didn't
Very
know
convenient.
necessarily what she was getting into.
And so for fearful dogs bringing to playgroups, we of course want to make sure we're bringing them out with dogs that we know and trust, with our playgroup helper dogs. We want to really ensure the playgroup experience was that there's nothing negative would occur in the yard for them. Or, dogs like that.
Well, at least she stood up. You had to get someone from the ground up to motivate her.
Somebody lower the hand.
Uh-huh.
Very nice.
And Swiffer didn't, walk willingly to the yard, but sometimes we have to make these decisions for them. We know what's waiting for them, right?
Yeah.
We know what we can get them to. She would have no idea, right? So in the moment in her kennel, we may feel terrible just trying to drag her out, carry her out there. She's struggling. But if we allow her to go on her terms in that type of situation, is she ever going to feel comfortable to trust us or come out of her kennel? She has no way of knowing that this is waiting for her, that this is on the other side of that experience. And so again, if dogs are actually motivating to her, this is game changing.
Okay, this is the end of the
Pretty
healer's
different, right?
first social session.
So Amy's walking with another dog,
About an hour.
identifying that Swiffer does indeed have pack drive. She can model that other dog's behavior. We can go on a walk with another dog to encourage Swiffer to follow along. She may not, even though that was a positive for her, she may not walk by herself, but she was absolutely willing to follow another pack mate. Pretty different, right? Day 2, she's at the front of the kennel. She's not necessarily stoked on life, but that's a huge decision that she's made, right? Back of the kennel, front of the kennel. She thinks she now thinks, just after one day, that maybe there's a reason to actually wait at the front here. And look at that.
This is
So proud.
Valentine's Day,
So proud.
February 14th. It's about
And now, in playgroup, we make a point, we're not really interacting with the dogs that often in playgroup ourselves. It's their time. But the dogs learn to kind of follow our lead in playgroup. They learn that we're relevant, we're kind of the leader out there. And so for fearful dogs, they certainly see, oh wow, okay, the other dogs care a lot about these guys. They listen to these guys a lot. These guys are relevant. And so that can really help, again, model behaviors. And these fearful dogs can kind of start to become a lot more comfortable with humans as a result. And they're just happier and not as stressed and not as scared, which makes them so much more receptive to now working with us.
You can go to the office, please. You can go into the office.
I think it's important to mention too that Swiffer is not just a one-off. This isn't just like one dog that this worked for. At least in our past experience, we see this working for most dogs that are really fearful. It's not going to necessarily be all, but there are a ton of dogs that are going to see other dogs as beneficial to them and hopefully open them up to new experiences fairly quickly instead of, historically where we were spending weeks, months sometimes, just trying to get a dog out of a kennel space, going through those counter-conditioning tactics to human presence. This is accelerating the pace, and we're able to get the dog out of the shell and think about how much more adoptable that dog is now, not just, being able to get out, meet people, and hopefully not be nearly as scared.
Sounds off just because of the barking kennels, but that's a waggy tail, that's a loose body, that's a happy dog 5 days in. And to Aaron's point, we see this every day. This is our absolute go-to. We are not wasting time, valuable time. And time is crucial, not just because, obviously we give our dogs all the time in the world. There's no time constraints for us, but for some shelters, that is absolutely what you're dealing with. And even if it's not, every kennel at APA can be freed up to save another life. And so if we take our time and we're going through kind of some of the more kind of mainstream ways of working with fear, there are dogs outside of our frame of mind that are dying because we don't have space for them. And so time is always of the essence. And in Orange County, this has again become, even though our behavioral work is just fledgling, this is still our go-to now to evaluate dogs and to especially work with fearful cases. And we're an open intake, high volume animal shelter, 18,000 animals a year. We don't have the time to load up on scaredy cats who aren't moving through the system, who aren't coming out for volunteers or staff. Being able to rotate them through playgroup right away is going to get them adopted quickly, and it's going to make us, keep us, free to bring in all the strays and all the owner surrenders and to keep up with capacity when you're dealing with an open intake shelter. And, of course, with scaredy cats, whenever you can get them into foster, got to plug that, right? And whenever you can get them into just offices, that's also great. Try to get them out of that scary environment as best you can. We do believe getting them into playgroup can allow you to open up your foster pool, right? How many fosters do you have in your network who don't have any animals at home, right? A lot of them are like, well, I can take her if she's dog social. And if you have no idea, that might limit the pool. But if you can at least see in playgroups, even if it doesn't go as dramatically well as Swiffer, even if you get the scared dog out in playgroup and they're at least just peaceful, right? They're tolerant. They're at least, it's not a negative experience for them, that can still open up foster options for them.
I think too, just in utilization of playgroup and being able to get this dog out, hopefully on a daily basis, to that program, the amount of handlers that are going in and out of the kennel space to lend to that generalization piece is huge. Like Mike had said before, one of the biggest fears is just getting this dog bonded to one person, and that one person is likely not going to be taking them home in the future. So let's make sure that we're getting them bonded to people in general, at least getting them to see people as not nearly as scary as they once thought.
Absolutely, and think about it, if the playgroup is a positive for them, and now every day people are coming to bring them to that thing that they love, then that's a good association to humans, right? Now when a person comes up to the kennel, they're no longer in fight or flight. They're no longer panicked about what is this going to mean for me. They're like, oh, cool, I'm going to playgroup. This person's bringing me to playgroup. So that's actually positive reinforcement, right? And if you think about it, the reward for the behavior of being up at the kennel was going to playgroup. And so that really changes that whole association to people. And I'm just gonna rant one more time because I love ranting on things. I bet you a lot of you have that habit in your shelter of, oh, that's Susie, she's a scaredy cat. Go ahead and let that one volunteer or that one staff member just walk her every day. And you guys are walking dogs, and you're like, oh, wait, no one's walked Susie yet. Wait, where's John? John hasn't been here to walk Susie yet. Oh, well, call John. He's got to come walk Susie. Stop doing that, right? Stop doing that. Unless John is going to adopt Susie, that's not helping anybody, right? If the dog is nowhere near is nowhere more comfortable when hanging out with an adopter than they were before John started showing up every day with cheeseburgers, then you're not doing the dog a service at all. And so really try to break that habit of these project fearful dogs, really try to break that habit, and that can be really emotionally difficult for the people who are really bonded to that dog. But it's best for that dog to start to actually pull that person out of their life for a second and start to get other people doing that generalized work, okay? We're supposed to hold questions to the end, I'm being told, so just hold on to that, and then we're gonna try to give, again, ample time for questions. Remember that one. Cool.
One more quick thing too is I think myself in shelter, I'm a guy. I think oftentimes dogs have greater fear towards men, or that is common. And by running playgroup every day, I saw a huge benefit to the point where when I was walking around the shelter to just try to find a fearful and or defensive dog towards me right before our presentations, I found two dogs that I had never seen before that had just recently come into shelter, but of 220 dogs, all 218 of them were excited to see me, even though for most of them, I had never gotten them out of a kennel. Their only experience with me was potentially just coming out into a yard, hanging out around me, and going back to the kennel space.
You're
But
that
was
playgroup
enough.
guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So talking about arousal, when we're looking at arousal in shelter, I'm thinking most of us experience this on a daily basis. Arousal is very common in the shelter environment and also very treatable. When looking at this, I think we have to realize that just like in fear behavior, it's a scary place for a dog. It's also a place where there's a lot of activity and a lot of reason to potentially become more aroused or more anxious in that setting, especially if we're not getting those dogs out on a daily basis, if they're not having opportunities to burn that energy. What do we expect when we actually go to get them out? Do we expect them to be super calm? No, I think we need to be looking at that and saying the shelter is a piece of the puzzle that's potentially creating some of this behavior. And now that we're seeing it, how do we work with it and how do we help dogs? So again, just like fear, the one thing that we can be looking to as a primary tool is playgroup. Getting dogs out, getting dogs out every day is really important. So every dog, every day, whether that be getting out of the kennel to go play fetch or go on long walks with handlers, or hopefully for most of our dogs, getting out into an actual playgroup setting, being able to burn both that physical and that mental energy. This can be huge in hopefully diminishing some of that arousal behavior that we're seeing in the kennel space. By a show of hands, how many of you guys have walked into a kennel, a dog is jumping up on you, mouthing you, maybe body slamming into you? It feels like this happens.
You should all raise your hands.
Exactly,
Right, yeah.
Feels
all over
like
the place. Yeah.
something we deal with every day. And again, we're gonna keep harping on this playgroup piece. When we're looking at helping these guys, do we have the time day in and day out to do 2 hours of training with every dog that is in our shelter? Probably not. We don't have enough volunteers. Resources are always kind of restricted. But can we set up somebody in a yard? Can we get another handler bringing dogs up into that space and letting them learn how to socialize, learn some incredibly beneficial skills for the future, and again, burn that physical and mental energy? The hope is absolutely. So the other piece of that puzzle is just starting to teach some rules and boundaries in the kennel space itself. So at APA, we have some rules before we even go to get a dog out of the kennel. The first rule is the dog must maintain 4 on the floor. And when we say 4 on the floor, I just mean 4 paws on the ground before we go to enter that space. So we're gonna watch a video of Marion, our old dog behavior program manager or co-manager, going into a kennel space and utilizing many of these tactics. In this video, at any point, if the dog she were going to get out was jumping up on the kennel gate, we're not necessarily going to give any cues or commands at that point, but we're gonna talk through our body. If the dog maintains 4 on the floor, you're gonna see Marion marking and rewarding for that behavior, low, trying to ensure that she's not encouraging the dog to jump up. As long as the dog is maintaining that 4 on the floor, you're gonna see her enter the kennel space. Now, lucky for us, with our kennels, they open both ways. So we tend to open the door inward. It gives us the ability to use the door as a yield point to the dog, to yield them towards the back. Once she's in, now we're going to see her marking and trying to continue to mark and reward for 4 on the floor. So capturing that good behavior, and I think that's really important. If we want dogs to know what we want them to do, how are they supposed to know if we are not capturing that behavior and trying to give them information for that piece? So now that she has the dog leashed up, she's at the very least, expectation for all of our dogs getting out of the kennel is that they maintain 4 on the floor, give us eye contact, don't bolt out the door, and wait for a release command. At APA, we use the word free. In this case, Marion's taking this dog through a full kennel routine, so the expectation is greater, and this is what we're doing with most of our dogs day in and day out, is getting them into a seated position, opening up that door, waiting for eye contact, and then releasing the dog as we go. I think it's important to mention that if we have a super stressed out dog, jumpy, mouthy, highly anxious, this dog hasn't been out of its kennel since it entered the shelter, it potentially doesn't know sit. Is it appropriate for us to try to teach sit in that moment to the dog before getting them out? Potentially not. So maybe we back off the first time. We just expect 4 on the floor, we expect that eye contact piece and the not bolting out the door, and then we get them out. We spend a little bit of time working on basic obedience skills, getting them to understand what sit is. That way we can take that information back into the kennel space and then start working them through it. I think what was so surprising to me was before Mike came to our shelter, we had dogs in our care for months, sometimes years, and I never really saw those dogs getting better. I think their behaviors oftentimes stayed the same and or deteriorated while they were with us, even though we had trainers coming out and working with those dogs. The training that was being done was once, maybe twice a week, and it was one person doing the work. An important piece or something that we try to implement in the shelter is that it's not just myself going to get dogs out that's going to be doing this work. I want to train all of my staff. I want to train all of the volunteers to know how to get dogs out appropriately and lend them the same information time in, time out. Generalization, we talk about this all the time, so that it doesn't matter who's getting in, the expectations remain the same. The dog knows exactly what it needs to do to be able to get out of that kennel space quickly. I think with those rules and boundaries, we see dogs who started by being super jumpy and mouthy, body slamming into us, grabbing at our arms as we're getting into the kennel. Just days and or a week later, we get in, the dog puts their butt on the ground automatically. As we enter the space, we put on their equipment, and we're able to, they're almost on autopilot. They know exactly what's expected. They want to get out of their kennel, and because we've been doing it repeatedly, time in and time out, the dog knows what to expect. So,
yeah, and if I can, with arousal issues in shelter, as Aaron was saying, that it's chronic, right? I mean, what shelter doesn't have dogs that are jumping and mouthing and body slamming? And the shelter is just a breeding factory for that behavior, and yet we're killing dogs for the behavior they learned in our shelter, right? And so those kennel routines, at face value, it's like, well, how's that addressing arousal issues? But when you actually, view the video and you see, right, we're starting the dog off in a better frame of mind before we ever even put ourselves in the kennel, right? We're teaching the dog, how are you even getting us in the kennel? How are you even getting out of the kennel? And at APA, it's completely mandatory. If you're going to handle our dogs, no matter what, from entry-level volunteer all the way up, if you're a staff member, no one's allowed to not do a kennel routine. And if any of you are thinking like, oh, but those poor dogs, they've been holding it all night, and are we really gonna make them do that? I understand where you're coming from, but I urge you to think much bigger picture than that. If we feel sorry for them because they're in our shelter and because they've had to hold it all night, and therefore we're not actually challenging them and teaching them anything, and we're just letting them drag us out of the kennel because we feel sorry for them, then we're feeling sorry for them to death, right? So we have to think bigger than that and think, if we don't want them spending another night holding it all day, then let's teach them things to get them adopted, right? And this type of skill set and this foundation that the dogs get by having this, okay, this is what we do, that's going to prevent what I think to be one of the most dangerous places in our shelter for dogs is that kennel space, is the intersection of people going in, handling the dogs in like these gauntlets, right? These just rows and rows of kennels, amped up reactivity and arousal issues. It's the most artificial place you could ever put a dog. Just single-housed kennels, rows of dogs. And so dogs are getting out and doing all sorts of naughty things in that environment, and then we're killing them for it. And so these kennel routines really, I do believe, are life-saving because it really can prevent those behaviors from ever developing, or can really teach them to stop doing all the stuff that's going to eventually get them into trouble and potentially make them lose their lives. So I think they are critical.
And I think, too, one of the main arguments that I feel like Mike had probably heard when he came to APA about kennel routines was a time thing. Time is a resource. Do I really have the time to be putting a dog through all of these paces? And when we're thinking again about that, I think we have to think big picture. If we put in a couple, this process isn't meant to take 10 minutes with a dog. And at the beginning, we may be talking about taking 2-3 minutes to take the dog through the process. But the goal would be that very soon, because the expectation is the same time in and time out, again, the dog knows what to do, and it's going to be faster and faster each day, making it easier and easier for handlers to be getting that dog out, and hopefully providing more handlers the ability to do it. So I think at APA 2, we have to start restricting handlers dependent on behavior. If we feel like potentially a new handler can't actually work with the behavior that the dog is displaying. But if we can be working on those pieces, again, it just opens up so many more doors and hopefully provides those dogs more opportunities to get out. Therefore, we're seeing the arousal less and less, and then not having to make tough decisions on them.
Absolutely. I think that's a good segue to our next video that Aaron's going to talk through. And this is a dog that had been in the shelter for, not our shelter, this is a different shelter that DPFL was visiting. The dog had been there for 3 years in shelter. And to Aaron's point, the dog's handlers continued to be lessened and lessened and lessened because of increased arousal issues. And so now the dog's handlers are just diminishing, and the dog's chances of adoption are decreasing, all of that leading to 3 years in kennel. And so when DPFL showed up, they were there for play groups, but they're also helping with some handling. So this brings up and sorry to jump on this.
No.
This brings up the controversial topic of, is there a time and place to use aversives when we are training? And so we're going to play the video for you. You're going to see an aversive use, which is a spray bottle of water. So talking through aversive super quickly, right? Some things are rewarding, some things are aversive. To some dogs, food and petting is rewarding. To some dogs, spray bottle of water, a shake can of pennies would be aversive. To some dogs, a spray bottle of water is actually rewarding. They might love that, right? To some dogs, your petting, like Swiffer early on, was actually aversive, right? And so we try to keep our emotions out of that. We don't predict what's rewarding or what's aversive, but at the same time, in shelter, after we play this video, we can talk through a little bit on why we believe there is a time and a place, if used within the bounds of science, and you're always looking for rewardable behaviors. We believe there is a time and a place, especially for dogs like this.
I mean, just thinking 3 years in for this dog, there are, at this time, only 2 handlers that had felt comfortable trying to get this dog out of the kennel. So it's been in shelter for 3 years. Now there's only 2 people that potentially feel comfortable getting this dog in and out. We're seeing right now him going up, grabbing pretty hard on the handler's arms.
And they're trying things like redirecting onto toys.
Exactly.
They're trying stepping out of the kennel, all the things that we've been taught.
We can see too, just in this video, the handler is trying to redirect to toy. The handler is, for a moment there, was going to grab the collar to try to provide a little bit of pressure to see if she couldn't deter the behavior. She's grabbing collar or the leash and providing pressure right now.
I think she's just grabbing the collar to protect herself.
Exactly,
honestly.
yeah.
Like, I think she's just, yeah.
There's a moment too where she's
right there. Let's see. So we hand over the handler a spray bottle.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Every time you move your arm.
So think of this: 3 years of practice behavior. The handler's handed a spray bottle. the handler uses the spray bottle for the first time. And you can see the moment it's used the first time, the dog backs off, kind of shakes it off and says, "What was that?" At no point does this dog seem to be in any distress over what just happened, but it looked like we got to a learning moment there, an ability to get to rewardable behavior. Before that second, the dog was never displaying behavior that we were capable of rewarding. But that one little spritz was enough to get 4 on the floor, the dog to stop the behavior, which then allowed the handler to begin a rewarding process for the dog to start teaching them what is more rewardable, what is less rewardable for you as I'm in your space. Now, after that, we saw, I think the bottle presented 2 more times so that you could see the dog thinking about going back to the behavior, jumping up and grabbing hold of the handler's arms again, and just the presence of the bottle itself had the dog immediately back down and or just choose not to jump altogether, which again allowed handler to be able to provide that reinforcement for good behavior too.
And it's 100% accurate. The goal is not to have this learning lesson for the dog be, I have this bottle,
Sure.
I'm threatening you with the bottle, right? We want it to be, and so BB, the handler who's filming, is coaching on a verbal negative marker. Say it, then spray it. Spritz. Spritz, so that the dog actually is not associating it to the bottle, they're associating it to that verbal negative marker. Unwanted behavior, spritz. And so you see at the end of that video, the handler goes back in and the dog does not go to the unwanted behavior, and then we can right away reward for the behaviors that we want.
And we see this all the time in playgroup, that negative marker along with use of aversive. If we're pairing that at the beginning, dog is likely, I think sometimes we get caught up saying the word no to a dog, but we expect them to know English.
No, stop, no.
And at no point is the dog actually learning that that means stop. On the flip side of that, if we can utilize a negative marker and pair that potentially with an aversive, the hope is that the dog is actually finding meaning in the word, so that way we can hopefully just go to the word in the future and when trying to communicate with the dog, and we won't have to worry about utilizing the aversive. The word will be enough. If we don't pair those two things, likely again, there's not a whole lot of learning happening for the dog.
For sure. And so the message here is not go home and just start spraying your dogs in the face for unwanted behaviors, right?
No.
But the bigger picture here is, if in our desire to not use any aversives in training, if our goal there is because we don't want to do anything harmful to our dogs, right? That's maybe the only reason why we're not using aversives, is we don't want to do anything harmful to them. Isn't it more harmful to allow that dog to do that behavior and sit in our shelter for 3 years? Isn't that actually more harmful to them? And so I think we need to give our dogs a little bit more credit that they can actually piece together this information if we challenge ourselves to not be lazy and just be like, I'm just going to spray the dog. If we challenge ourselves to be offering every training opportunity, every enrichment opportunity, but also every learning opportunity, rewarding every single thing there is to reward, but having some light aversives like this in our toolkit so that we can get through to dogs quickly and effectively, so that we're not killing them because we refuse to harm them. Isn't that right? Isn't that completely illogical? Well, we didn't want to use aversives, and so now we're going to euthanize this dog because he's been in our shelter for 3 years. And it doesn't have to always be that dramatic of stakes, but I think it's important enough that we wanted to bring it up because, again, it is in our toolkit, and it is something that we do believe can be humanely and finessefully and compassionately used to get to rewardable, safe, adoptable behaviors. And so we can certainly talk after the class if you have more questions on that.
And I think too, this, lending to what Mike had just said, it's treating dogs as individuals. It's realizing that not every dog is going to respond the same way to different tools that we're utilizing. So it's like Mike had said, is it important that we're utilizing this with every dog? No, but that dog who was there for 3 years was able, in a matter of 10 or 15 seconds, to learn something that within the span of 3 years it wasn't able to learn. So, again, just realizing it's part of our toolkits.
All right. The third behavior that we believe are really putting our dogs at risk, that are really resulting in dogs dying in our country, barrier and on-leash reactivity. So again, I would argue that our shelter environments are creating these behaviors, right? More often than not, these behaviors are created or at least exacerbated in the shelter environment. Think about if you come into the shelter and you're kind of afraid of dogs as a dog. Like maybe you had some bad experiences, maybe you've never been around dogs, and now all of a sudden you're around 200 of them, right? And you're just stuck in a cage seeing these dogs pass by you every day. Why wouldn't you become barrier reactive or on-leash reactive? Why wouldn't you become barrier reactive to a person if you are stuck in a kennel all day long? You're frustrated, you're not getting out of your kennel, people just keep passing you and passing you and passing you, and then you're just like, you know what, screw it, blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay, that got some attention. Okay, or you know what, I'm scared, and someone came up to my kennel, and I went, blah, 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 and they left. Oh man, that worked. Okay, I thought that person was gonna do something bad, but I barked and they left. So that worked, right? And then it keeps working and it keeps working and it keeps working. So these can be really self-rewarding behaviors, sadly, and they can be learned behaviors in our shelter. And we're also, I think in very common cases, assuming that these are that this is aggression. We're assuming that the dog in kennel who's being very reactive to people or dogs is an aggressive, unsuitable for adoption dog. We're assuming dogs on leash that are being reactive to other dogs are aggressive. We're calling that leash aggression or dog aggression. And to our graves, we will tell you that you cannot diagnose aggression through barrier or on-leash reactivity. We're not saying it isn't aggression, but if that's the information you have, you can't say that dog's actually aggressive. You can say he is reactive, but you cannot define aggression with barrier or on-leash reactivity. So call it reactivity and stop calling dog aggression reactivity. I said this in my last talk, but that also gets challenging if we're trying to make it nicer sounding, right? Like he's attacked like 3 dogs and we're calling, oh, he's reactive. He's reactive to dogs. No, he's not. He's actually dog aggressive. That's okay. But calling him reactive gives a false sense of what the actual challenge is, and it also lumps all the actual reactive dogs together with the aggressive dogs. So aggression isn't aberrant. Let's just, okay, he's dog aggressive. So in shelter, barrier reactivity to people and really dogs and just barrier activity itself in the kennels, that's a tough one to solve. That's a really tough one to solve. You can try like parking outside the kennel and like rewarding the dog with food every single time people walk by, trying to capture calm behavior. I'm not gonna say don't try that, but like, man, what happens when you, all right, I've been here for 5 hours, I'm gonna move on, and then people keep passing, you're not there anymore to give that information. It's a really tough thing to solve in shelter. The only real solution I've seen when it comes to barrier reactivity is if your shelters are built in a way that you've got like groupings of kennels. You know, you got a room of 6 or 8 or 10, you know, kennels. That's a more controlled environment. You can, with that controlled environment, potentially with treat buckets or with really kind of strict instructions for visitors, you can have that be a very consistent message. People walk through, it rains food. People walk through, it rains food. You can do it in that regard. It still takes a lot of really consistency, but when you're dealing with like APA, where it's just long rows of kennels, I don't think you can really ever solve the barrier reactivity. You can certainly put signage up that makes sure people understand, meeting me out of my kennel, I'm an awesome dog. You can do things like just ensuring that when you take the dog out to show to people, you're not bringing them by the kennel, you know, you're just bringing them to a yard or a room and bringing the dog out to them. I don't think that's irresponsible or hiding anything, because as I ranted on earlier, the kennel environment is the most artificial environment there ever is going to be for a dog. I don't believe that behaviors exhibited really in the kennel are really going to at all be worthwhile making any assumptions or any like making any leaps that that's going to be relevant for the dog outside of the kennel. And so I'm just fine saying, all right, he's barrier reactive in kennel, let's get him out and show him to people outside of the kennel area. As an example of why I say that, this is a dog currently in our care in Orange County. So this is Matilda. barrier reactivity, right? Matilda doesn't look like a super friendly dog. A lot of teeth. She's actually in a glass front kennel on purpose because she's barrier reactive. We have kennels with glass fronts and the wire fronts. We learned, probably don't put her in a wire front kennel. The glass is better for her. So that's Matilda in her kennel. Now this is minutes later with the same exact person she was barking at, hanging out with it. Okay? That's one of the sweetest men I've ever met, Cameron. And that's Matilda getting all the loves from Cameron, who she was just barking at and showing teeth at in the kennel, right? Kind of basic, but hopefully maybe not, but depending on where you're at. If you're still using in-kennel behavior to make any determinations, Matilda is not an unsafe dog, right? She's barrier reactive, she's frustrated, she needs more. She's telling us, I need to get out of this place, and I need more. But you can see just out of the kennel, literally 30 seconds later with the same dude, she's like, oh, sweet, I love you, Cameron. So not who she actually is as a dog.
I think a piece of the puzzle here is being able to know that and be able to train people to feel comfortable still entering that space. I think if Matilda was displaying that behavior towards a lot of people, they'd say, no way I'm going to get that dog out of the kennel. What we didn't necessarily see is what happened in the kennel space, and I think oftentimes what you'll find with those dogs that are super reactive towards you as a human, if we start to crack that door, if we start to get into the space, many of those guys are going to retreat, and they're actually going to move towards the back of the kennel, and they're going to give you some information to say, man, this looks like fear, this looks potentially like defense, and by getting in, I can use defensive handling skills to be able to get you out, get you to a calmer space, out of that really artificial zone, and see what we saw from Matilda, who is a very sweet and loving dog, and actually seemed to really like her handling.
As soon as, for a lot of these dogs, as soon as you open the door, you're sort of calling their bluff. You know, I'm not, again, advocating you go home and just start opening doors on dogs that you're worried about, but there is a way, open that door a crack. If they open inward, that's safer, but you open inward, you can toss some food, kind of see how they respond when they have that gap. Most of these dogs are going to back up, to Aaron's point, and they're just like, oh, just kidding, I was just sorry, just kidding, I was kind of scared. Or they're gonna fully retreat. Matilda, yeah, we could go right into the kennel with her. And other dogs might still be feeling defensive when you go into that kennel, but they're retreating to the back, and that gives you already insight into, all right, if you could cut a hole in the back of that kennel, would they run through it? And almost all these dogs would, but they don't have that option. So they've got to go into these threat displays. So now, when it comes to on-leash reactivity, we certainly, again, as we've mentioned before, we're tool junkies. We love using any training tools that we can to help us get to rewardable behaviors, help us get these dogs to adoptable behaviors. And so for on-leash reactivity, we tend to see the most success with head halters, Gentle Leader or head halties, or the Halty brand stuff, either one. So we go to that tool first. We always let the dogs tell us, though, if that's the right tool for them. So if the dog is just so averse to the Gentle Leader, even through conditioning them, or if it just doesn't provide any better handling, then we won't go there. But more often than not, the head halters allow us to have more control over the dog. If the dog is reacting, dogs react at what they're looking at, right? And so if we turn and move the other direction to increase space or increase distance from the stimulus, when we turn, their head has to turn with us, right? And if we're on like a harness or a collar, they can still be turning the other direction and talking smack while we're walking that direction, right? So that's why we prefer head halters. So now when it comes to on-leash reactivity, have I ever said you can't define dog aggression based on on-leash reactivity? Have I ever said
I
that
don't
to you
think
guys?
so.
No,
I've never heard that.
Okay, well, that's a thing. Tony is a perfect example of that thing that I keep talking about. This is the dog's very first time coming to playgroup. So we've got on-leash reactivity. So because of how forward and reactive he was, we put a muzzle on him because we don't know what we're dealing with. Just because I can't define that as aggression doesn't mean it's not. So we muzzled him up. You can see him slamming at the fence. So he's barrier reactive and on-leash reactive. More trying to get through that gate at Lydia. That's actually my dog. She wasn't at the time. I will brag about her in a second. So these are helper dogs. These are tried and true helper dogs. Dogs that are up for adoption, but are impeccable with their dog skills. Who we can use to figure out what is actually behind all that. So the muzzle's on there to prevent these dogs from getting hurt. But I trust them not to harm Tony if Tony does something unsavory. But we can already kind of see here, all right, we're not dealing with just true offensive aggression. That's Lydia doing her famous dolphin punch to get them to play. So I've already seen, all right, this dog is not dog aggressive. I'm taking that muzzle off.
Yeah, I think too, when we're talking about barrier or on-leash reactivity, we talk about that fear, anxiety, frustration, and potentially aggression, or potentially aggression.
Aaron just got run into right there while he was taking notes.
What's that?
You just got run into in that video
Oh, of
while you were
course.
taking notes.
This is back in the good old days when Mike and I got to assess dogs together and hang out every day.
Yep.
Now he left me. Jerk.
So not an aggressive dog. He's actually a freaking social dog, right? Do you see the play bows and the smiles and the zoomies?
And how long did that take us to get to? We're talking, that's a minute and a half to go from super barrier reactive, on-leash reactive, to now throwing out play bows, zooming around the yard, showing dog sociable behavior.
And you guys don't have to out yourselves, but I guarantee you there are people in this room right now who are probably thinking about dogs that you've either euthanized or not pulled into your rescue or are sitting in your kennel for years as no dog dogs because of those behaviors Tony was showing before he came into the playgroup yard. Am I right? Right, guys? Yeah. So that's okay. That's why you're here learning all of this. But I think Tony is an incredible example of why we love to yell at people about not defining aggression based on on-leash or barrier reactivity. And to even if it's not as dramatic or as final as a life or death decision, it can still be incredibly problematic if we're saying Tony is dog aggressive, he can't go home with other dogs, he can only be walked by 2 people, he can't play with dogs in shelter, he's a no dog, and now Tony's adoption pool is now like this compared to this, right? And so don't think it's as dramatic as, oh, well, we don't euthanize. Okay, but do you close off adoption chances to your dogs? Do you limit just a life of joy and enrichment and social, behaviors to your dogs by assuming, aggression because of on-leash reactivity? Most of us do. And so critical that we actually get to the bottom of that.
Well, and think about Tony specifically or other dogs. Say Tony was also over-aroused in his kennel and he's showing this barrier activity. We're trying our best to figure out ways to burn energy. What better way to do that than playgroup? And we're not necessarily really going to know what his dog-dog behavior is until we get him out into a yard. I know specifically at APA, most of our helper dogs or dogs that we use to assess new dogs coming in are on-leash reactive or barrier reactive dogs. So, and that doesn't necessarily completely go away. Obviously, it can diminish with use of playgroup. But when they're first coming in, we're seeing those behaviors, but we're also realizing, again, this doesn't mean dog aggression. Let's get them out into a yard. Let's see what they really look like. And more often than not, super sociable dogs that we're able to utilize in the future to help us with new dogs coming into our shelter. So. All right, guys, so talking about animal aggression.
And this is what, number 4, right? This is our 4th, behavior that is leading to dogs dying in our shelters.
So, when we're talking about animal aggression, I think it's important that we designate what is normal behavior versus what is actually aberrant. So, because a dog wants to hunt and kill a squirrel, is that something that we see as necessarily out of the ordinary? Because the dog seems to have some sort of prey drive towards cats, is this really that out of the ordinary? Or can we potentially see that there are fairly easy ways of management that can provide this dog still a safe live outcome? I think animal aggression, like Mike just spent an entire slide talking about, can often be misdiagnosed as barrier reactive or on-leash reactive. So I'll let Mike say it again.
You just saw that, right? So we're talking about, okay, we're not. This is about dogs who you either have a history of, right? They maybe were returned for not getting along with the other dog in the shelter, or in the shelter they maybe got out and got into a scuffle with the dog, or in playgroup they got into a scuffle. These are dogs who have done something, with an animal. So we're not talking about on-leash reactivity or barrier reactivity. We're talking about an actual, incident of aggression towards an animal, in terms of now moving forward with, euthanasia because of that information.
Well, and I think, that the next piece of this, which is considering context for the aggression. Did this aggression happen in the home? If it happened in the home towards another dog, were there resources involved? Was there food around that potentially caused this behavior? Is that within the realm of normal? Is that within the realm of still being able to potentially place the dog in the future into a home, just, managing the actual resource itself? Was this more random than that, or was there true aggression that was happening in the home? I can't tell you the amount of times we've gotten dogs in from another shelter where in their owner surrender notes, when filling out how does this dog do with other dogs, it says aggressive. And I would say more often than not, what we're finding out is there is no context really given to us what that means. We're not going to take that at face value. We want to utilize playgroup to be able to figure out what does that aggression actually look like. And in most cases, again, I think it's probably on-leash reactivity or barrier reactivity that are being misdiagnosed.
And again, even if even if we can get on the phone and talk to people, hey, you surrendered this dog to Austin Animal Center. You mentioned this. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? If they're like, oh yeah, we bring him to dog parks and he gets into scuffles sometimes. Okay, well, were there ever any serious injuries?
Yep.
Oh, maybe a couple, punctures, but nothing too bad. Or yeah, we had another dog in the home, and they would get into scuffles over toys or over food. Things like that were. Okay, like that's, to Aaron's point, that seems pretty easy to manage and to train to offer some coping skills. So should they have to lose their life for that? We don't think so.
Yeah, and I think, when we're talking about injuries, considering the significance of the injury is really important. The second piece of that is just the interruptibility, the ability to get the dog to come away. Did we as handlers just simply have to call to the dog and the dog moved away immediately and had no desire to go back? Or was it more complicated than that? Did it take use of potential tools to get the dog away? Did the altercation last, several seconds, a minute? So looking at all of these pieces, again, I think treating every dog as an individual is really important, but then treating every incident as an individual too is really important, and making sure that we're asking the questions, trying to get as many details as possible so we can dig down to the bottom of what aggressive actually means.
Can I get on a soapbox again super quick?
Yeah.
Cool.
I love Mike on his soapbox.
So stop saying bait dog. Stop calling these dogs bait dogs. Okay. So you got a dog into your care. They come in and they've got scars all over them, right? But it's like a nice dog, and so you're like, well, he couldn't have been a dog who was fighting. He had to have been a bait dog. Okay. Now we're throwing victims of dog fighting under the bus entirely, right? By just saying, well, but since he's nice, he must be a bait dog. He must have been used by those vicious dog fighting dogs. Problematic, right? So just stop calling them bait dogs. The dog comes into your care, he has scars on him. Don't make up his backstory. Just get to know him as an individual. Okay?
I just had a dog come in 3 weeks ago. Mike is gone now, and people were telling me that, yes, that the dog was a bait dog, and I had to pump the brakes with them and make sure that we were, did we have any context to that? Did we have knowledge of this dog being a bait dog? We didn't, so I was making sure to carry the torch.
Claire, can you help him?
Yeah, we got to carry the torch.
I thought I extinguished that term before I left.
We did, we have some new people that maybe don't know, but anyway, so yes, important.
Proceed.
Okay, so that bait dog piece. Okay, so yeah, obviously when it comes to animal aggression, we want to be transparent about whatever aggression the dog is displaying. We don't want to be hiding things from adopters, but there is the potential that, if a dog doesn't necessarily get along with other dogs, that's okay. We just need to be notifying our adopters that, look, to our knowledge, whether that be prior history or, sometimes maybe what we're seeing in shelter, that our recommendation would be to not be placing this dog around other dogs. We still think that is not necessarily a reason for a dog to die. It just may require more specific placement in the future. And then again, teaching, educating, making sure people realize what they're taking home. So, that's part of that sharing behavior notes and history, and hopefully providing context to those notes. So, I think there have been many cases too where a dog has displayed dog aggression in shelter. It's gotten into scuffles. It's done damage to other dogs while it's been with us, or potentially with another shelter. But does that necessarily mean that that's providing us a clear picture to how the dog does in a home? There are many cases that I can think of where dogs came out to playgroup. They didn't really do very well. They seemed like they were potentially offensively aggressive with other dogs. We counseled heavily and told their adopters, look, this dog likely can never be around other dogs. We wouldn't recommend bringing other dogs into the home. I think of Wilson, actually, as one of these dogs who was really stressed out in shelter and was just immediately going after dogs as he got into a yard and was fairly challenging to deter once he was in an altercation. Years later, he's now in a home working with do you know where he is?
Well, I know he's doing detection work with a cop.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where he is, but he's doing detection work, and he also lives with the dog. So if we were going off of our information, everything that we were doing with him in playgroup, we would have said he could never be around other dogs, and he's a prime example of potentially the shelter creating some behaviors that once he was out of shelter would actually diminish, and now, again, lives with the dog. And that's just one case. That happens all the time. There's times where I see pictures of a dog that we had who was maybe offensively aggressive or showed some form of significant aggression in shelter with us, in home with another dog laying on a couch or something together. And I'm kind of cringing, but at the same time ecstatic to say, what I saw wasn't necessarily the whole picture, and now this dog is out of the shelter and able to actually cohabitate and live an awesome life with another dog.
Right, yeah, I think I mentioned in one of the panels yesterday that I actually have learned to really enjoy being wrong, and I think that's one of the examples of that. We've stopped being really definitive in the diagnoses of these cases. Even though the dog Aaron's referencing, I can think back to a dog Brock at APA who was this brindley dude we could never get him into playgroup. He was just a jerk in playgroup. He was interruptible, but if you weren't just like, Brock, stop trying to attack dogs, he would do it. You'd say stop, he'd be like, fine. But we could never get him to ever socialize in playgroup. He was with us forever. He got adopted, and that was one of those cases where they sent photos, and they were kind of rubbing it in. They were like, nah, he's living with a dog. And we were like, okay, it's cool. You don't have to be a jerk about it. We're cool with that. We actually think that's cool. I know we said, hey, don't put him around dogs, but we actually think that's cool. And so we're going to put that in the file of sweet, we were wrong. That's a good thing. But we were willing to, again, we put the training into Brock to at least know if we're putting him up for adoption, he can, and Aaron's going to get to this in a second, if we're putting him up for adoption, he's got to at least be able to walk around in public and not be actively trying to go after every dog. So we got the training in him to be able to say, okay, cool, we think he can go out and be a nice dog out in society and with reasonable management efforts. But we were willing to take a chance on him still, and we were willing to still let adopters take him, knowing that down the road, even if they listen to us for a year, they might at some point be like, it's been a long time, so they're going to try stuff that we said not to, right?
Yeah, we can't always control that stuff. Like Mike had said, I enjoy being wrong. It's not, and I think I'm trying as best when I'm talking to people to say, I don't know everything. All I know is what what I've seen historically from this dog. I can't predict the future, but I think those learning experiences are really critical in us being able to expand our life saving and realize that we don't always know what things are going to look like in the future. Okay, so training, BMOG, management. There's a thing at the top of that list that's weird. I know we haven't talked about it yet, but that is playgroup. Obviously, we want to be utilizing this as best as possible. At APA, I think within the city of Austin, we have a unique population. We're lucky to be at 98, 99% live outcome rate. So this does mean we're sometimes taking on more significantly challenged dogs when around other dogs. So we utilize playgroup not just as an enrichment piece, but we will also utilize it as a form of behavior modification, trying to at least get a dog who is offensively aggressive out in the presence of other dogs that we trust to make good decisions, even if that dog doesn't, while it's in the yard. To cohabitate, just be within that space and not be making an offensive choice to go after them. And then, pairing with that, incorporating training in order to get the dog to a place where an adopter doesn't have to modify their life entirely and walk their dog, at times when nobody else is awake. 2 a.m., 3 a.m., just to get the dog out. That doesn't seem fair. We want people to be able to still take these dogs home and live a fairly normal life and have expectations of the dog when they're in the presence of other dogs. Even if they don't get along with them when off leash, can we at least teach them to be in the presence of another dog with a handler and be making better decisions than reacting or trying to actually access that dog? It's a good segue into Miguel, who's a dog that we pulled from the Austin Animal Center. Now, at Austin Animal Center, he did actually display more significant animal aggression, so dog-dog aggression. There were 2 scenarios, one of them out in playgroup, one of them as he was being returned to a kennel space, in which he grabbed hold of another dog, did do moderate to significant damage. So we knew before he even came into our care, look, we're dealing with a dog that has potentially displayed offensive aggression in the past. The fact that AAC did playgroup gave us a little bit of context, said, okay, well, we're going to try to utilize playgroup in the future, but we already know he's displayed some aggression in the past, so when we do this, we're going to be providing some safety mechanisms as we go. So we brought him out. We spent 2 weeks bringing him out around other dogs in our playgroups on muzzle. As he would come out, we were trying to provide information to him as if and when he was choosing to offensively go after dogs. And what we found was he was fairly interruptible. When he was making those choices, we were able to start talking him through that, getting him to back down and make other choices. Within a 2-week span, he went from entering the yard and immediately going after any dog that he saw indiscriminately to coming out, sniffing some dogs, hanging out, creating space. And again, was he super playful? Was he the most sociable dog we had ever seen? No, but at the very least, we were able to get him to a point of not making that offensive choice to just go to a dog and go after them, which was huge. So that was the first component in our training plan for Miguel. The second piece was he still remained unavailable. We knew that his aggression could potentially cause damage to other dogs. What we felt like we hadn't necessarily tackled was his on-leash reactivity or barrier activity. So you're going to notice now I'm no longer calling the animal aggression, I'm no longer calling what he's displaying aggression. Now I'm just talking through that reactivity. Yes, he had displayed aggression in the past. What we wanted to start working through is the reactivity, which was likely fueled by some form of aggression. In doing so, what we were trying to teach him was when in the presence of other dogs, return to your handler, check in with your handler, sit by your handler, and remain there until we tell you otherwise. What we're going to see in a video down below is through our behavior team's work, and then after the behavior team worked with this dog, we passed him off to our CGC Top Dog team, so he is being worked both a little bit by staff, but mostly by volunteers now. We provided him rules and boundaries around what he can do when he's off leash around dogs. We provided him rules and boundaries when he was on leash, what he could do around dogs. We also tried to simulate off leash situations with him in a more public setting to say, okay, say for some reason a leash were dropped, or you got out of a fence and there was another dog present. Can you still make a good decision in that case? And in doing so, we found he was with our team. That's when we passed him off to the CGC Top Dog or our CGC Top Dog team, and he began just expanding that work and continuing to polish that work with more and more handlers. So we go back to generalization. We got him to do what we needed him to do with us, but now we needed to make sure that we could replicate that with other people in the future. We're not adopting this dog. We have to have expectations that somebody else is going to come out and take this dog home. And in doing so, we need to prepare them for that new handler. So generalization comes in huge. Okay, so what we also found was he was highly people motivated. He loved people. So doing a lot of this work, we already had that on our side. We're people, and he was staying in tune with us. He was wanting to check in with us. He was wanting to please, which really lent itself to the rest of the training that we're doing. So what you're going to see now is a video of Miguel being handled.
It's quick, but this is what we put really every dog that we've ever labeled dog aggressive, we ensure that they can pull this off.
Kind of call it, there's some semblance, we used to call it Diego protocols, which was
Right.
One of our first dogs that displayed offensive aggression and did pose some challenges around other dogs. We kind of created this for him. Now, what we're seeing right here is just part of the Canine Good Citizen test, which is handshake.
Yep.
Two dogs approaching one another, stopping within a few feet of each other. Both of those dogs are actually not super dog social, but what they needed to be able to do was sit by their handler's side, check in with their handler, and move on without choosing to aggress. So it can happen. We can take dogs that maybe don't necessarily do well with other dogs, but with our assistance, we can teach them, we'll keep them safe. They don't have to worry. I think a lot of times offensive aggression may stem from some level of fear or seeing a dog as a threat. But if we as handlers can provide them the sense of security, the sense that if they practice what we're asking of them, we're not going to insist that they meet that dog. We're not going to place them into a threatening position. Hopefully we can teach them to remain calm, check in with us, and move on, which from an adoption standpoint just opens up the potential for the dog not just to have to live in a home and go out into a backyard space without any other dogs around. This may open up the opportunity to live in certain apartments where there might still be some traffic around, but the dog is able to practice and know what to do even when another dog is present.
Yeah, that ability, again, if we're talking about the bounds of animal aggression, if the fact that he can be trained to pull off that kind of skill where he can at least be out on a walk with his owner, and if someone else with their dog walks by, he shouldn't be, if we're going to put him up for adoption and say you are a good candidate, we're going to stand by you and find you a live outcome, you've got to at least, show us that you can be out in public and be somewhat near a dog, right? We're not going to ask you to meet a dog out in public. We're not going to ask you to go to dog parks. We're not going to ask you to live with a dog, but just be safe enough for your adopter to be able to walk around outside and not have to feel like, again, they have to just be walking around like at 2 a.m. And so that's what we throw at really a lot of our dogs, but especially if we've seen any components of animal aggression in them. Just quickly, so we don't assume you guys know what we're talking about. So we have a Canine Good Citizen Ready program and a sister program called the Top Dog program. So we developed the Canine Good Citizen Ready program 2013, and it was a small grant we got from Best Friends to just pilot the length of stay for blocky-headed, short-coated dogs with or without this program. And so we had for a year a control group of dogs that would have been candidates for the Canine Good Citizen program, and then a pool of dogs that we didn't put through the program, and then a pool of dogs that we actually put through the training, kind of the same variables in both groups. Some got the training, some didn't. And for that first year, we actually saw an 80% decrease in length of stay for pit bull type dogs that went through the CGC Ready program. We only picked pit bull type dogs because they're our longest length of stay, not because they needed any more training. And so that program now has blossomed into a program that has like 50 volunteers that are highly trained. They're all like hireable probably as dog trainers in shelters across the country. But these are just everyday folks that just have come in, have gone through all the training to get to that high rank. And now they are personally responsible for really passing these dogs through the Canine Good Citizen test, and then they're marketed as being CGC ready. We're not actually certifying them because we don't want this false sense of security that like, all right, you don't have to do anything, right? The adopters can just, you can do whatever you want, they're ready, right? We want them to still be putting the work in, but the dog, in order to pass, has to show that generalization with other handlers. And then the Top Dog program is our newer sister program, and that's there to still have that same systemized training program, an actual test that these dogs have to pass, and then the marketing that goes behind that. Once they've passed it, we can brag about them being these highly trained dogs. The Top Dog program is there for dogs who may not be eligible for CGC because of maybe something in their history. We want to make sure if we're calling CGC dogs, that we're actually kind of abiding by what that should be, right? We don't want to put dogs in the CGC program that maybe have a bite history, because we want the Canine Good Citizen Ready program to really be in the spirit of what a Canine Good Citizen should be. But hey, if you have a bite history, which will be our next slide, doesn't mean you're an awful dog, but let's put you in the Top Dog program so that we're not muddying or diluting the CGC program. Because we've seen now people are coming to APA a lot adopting CGC ready dogs because they want like a personal service dog, or they want a dog to take as a therapy dog. They're really targeting our CGC dogs. And so just so that we fully explain those two programs, that's what we're doing. And it's really cool because like, I see these videos and I'm just in awe because Carrie Morris was supposed to be presenting with us today. She runs the CGC Top Dog program. She had a baby like 3 days ago, so she's not with us, which we can kind of understand. But she runs that program and has just turned it into this machine. It's just pumping out volunteer after volunteer after volunteer that are just these badass dog training professionals now, working with some of the most challenging dogs in the country and passing them through these classes and getting them adopted. So it's a pretty incredible thing, and we have apprenticeships to come out and learn if you'd like to know how to develop that program.
50 volunteers, 100 dogs on any given day. It's incredible. And to think that all of those volunteers most of them came in with 0 dog experience or very limited dog experience to begin with. It's really, really cool to see. Beyond that, I wanted to just make clear that when in CGC and Top Dog, if they haven't passed the tests, that doesn't make them unavailable for adoption. While they're being trained, most of these dogs are still available to be adopted. So they may never reach that CGC ready or Top Dog ready while they're in our care, but just having them in the program absolutely increases their adoptability. People see that they can be trained, they're being worked with, and that does lend us the ability at APA to then provide some follow-up work with adopters to continue that work if they want to. If they want to get their dog to CGC certified or Top Dog certified, we're more than willing to lend that assistance.
Yep. All right, guys, last reason. So just simply having a bite history. I see that a lot around the country. There's this kind of, we don't adopt out bite dogs, right? What the hell is a bite dog? Like all dogs are capable of biting, right? I just friggin' hate the term bite dog. Okay, did you ever do anything crappy in your life, like 5 years ago? Are we calling you like a crappy to waiters person, you know? I mean, I kind of might call you that if you are crappy to waiters, don't do that, but right, we're not calling you something that you once did at some point and you've learned better choices or better habits, right? We're not defining you as that. And so dogs are capable of biting. They're living, breathing creatures. So it's not that we don't take bites on humans seriously, but if a bite occurs, if there's broken skin on a human and the dog has had to serve bite quarantine, there's a bite on file, that shouldn't just be an immediate death sentence. There should be an analysis. There should be a case file made to figure out, okay, what occurred? What actually happened when this incident occurred? What was the context? What was the trigger? What was the severity of the bite? What was occurring just around this whole entire circumstance that led to this bite? And how likely is that to occur again? How generalized of a trigger was this? Or was this a pretty specific, kind of situation that we can kind of wrap our heads around and say, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. The dog was being dragged by the collar into the crate, and he turned and bit the guy on the wrist. Okay, we can kind of see, all right, we can sort of see the context of that. We can potentially work with that behavior and do some counter conditioning, and we can move forward. And so I think a bite isn't a bite, right? It's not just, oh, the dog's bitten, now I know what I need to know about the dog. No, now that just starts. Knowing the dog has bitten before now should click in, okay, let's investigate and let's try to figure out what actually occurred when the dog actually bit. And so that shouldn't just be all right, we don't adopt out bite dogs. Similar to what we talked about with animal aggression, when it comes to just simply adoptions, you might think about liability or things like that. Of course, be transparent. Everything we know, our adopters know. We tell them everything. We have them read everything, and then of course they're signing, waivers showing that they are aware of this history. They're aware of these notes, and they're agreeing to take the dog with the full knowledge of the dog's full history. And so, of course, there are going to be cases where even at APA, we might come across a dog who we don't believe is safe and we can't find a live outcome. But just because they've bitten doesn't mean that's the outcome. We have to analyze each and every dog, and again, treat each and every dog as an individual, right? So with Connie here, Connie's a dog at OC Animal Care. He has bitten, I think, 3 times. It's all the exact same context. He's in his kennel. People are shoving their fingers into his kennel, and he's biting them on the hand. They're minor bites. They have never really ever gone any farther than just minor bites on the hand. For us, it's like, dude, why did he bite 3 times? That's kind of our fault. And when we learned that the first time, we've got to put him in better housing, better kennels, make sure we're keeping fingers safe. But outside of the kennel, doesn't look like a dangerous dog to me. That's Ariel, one of our playgroup leads and kennel attendant extraordinaires. So again, that's just one person, right? But then, there's Cameron coming up too. And so, yes, Connie has bitten before. Connie's actually bitten more than once. But that's not the whole story on Connie. Connie's a very nice dog in every other context. Oh, thank you, Jamie. So Jamie, our RVT, said he went to the groomers and was fine at the groomer. So even an invasive, did that just happen? Or was that Cool. So like a month ago, and he'd already bitten before that, he went to the groomer and was totally cool at the groomers. So even more proof that, again, a bite isn't a bite isn't a bite. A bite shouldn't just define who the dog is. Let's see what else is going on with this dog. And okay, so we kind of understand the trigger. Now it's on us to keep him and the people safe by being creative with how we kennel him and whatnot. But Connie does not deserve to die. And that's our 5 reasons. Yeah. Sweet.